it's either we're all gonna do it or I'm gonna do it on my own. That was the real start into what spiraled out of control with match fixing.
A footballer whose name became synonymous with scandal and a career derailed by a fateful mistake. This is Moses Swaibu, once a rising star and a player tipped for greatness in the Football League. But his world came crashing down when he got involved with the Chinese MAFIA and caught in a match-fixing scandal that led to a 16-month prison sentence.
Both on and off the pitch, my life was literally spiraling.
In the blink of an eye, he went from being a player with a future to someone whose career and freedom were in jeopardy.
When I was in the station, they're like, we're gonna rearrest you. Like, rearrest me for what? You've stolen a newspaper.
This isn't a tale of just a fall from grace though. It's about survival and it's about redemption. It's about facing your darkest days and finding the strength to rise again. For perspectives, this is Moses Swaibu. Raw, real, and in his own words.
And I remember him telling me one time, yeah, you're never gonna make it. Hi, I'm Moses Swaibu. This is Perspectives with Rising Ballers.
Moses, thank you for joining us, bro. So you born in Islington, grew up in South London?
Yeah, so I grew up just opposite Highbury. I was born in Islington, Whittington Hospital. Then I moved to Nunhead in South East London. Then moved to Peckham. Then ended up at Bermondsey. Then moved again with my dad to Thornton Heath.
Done the rounds.
Yeah. Early on, there was a lot of movement. I had cousins in Forest Gate. So I'll probably say from 8 till 10, well, probably earlier than that. From around 6 till 12, I was always between East London, Croydon, Bermondsey, Peckham, Nunhead, so I travelled quite a lot.
Yeah. What was it like as a young person moving around that often? And then also just like, what was the upbringing like generally?
You know what, I'll describe it as being fun, you know? I think when you're that young, you don't really realise how important your childhood is at that time. I come from Uganda, my parents are Ugandan as well, so they were born over there. A lot of my heritage, we had a lot of parties and like a lot of community social engagements. I can't remember where it was specific, but there was like a youth centre in Forest Gate that was prominent for like African parties. So my earliest childhood was growing up, going to the parties, spending time with my cousins, and really having fun as a kid, to be honest.
At what point did football first come into your life?
I'll say probably when I moved to Thornton Heath. I have an older brother, he's 2 years older than me. My first team I joined was Mayfield Wanderers. So where Silverley Road is, it's literally 2 minutes from Thornton Heath roundabout. So I remember playing football like with the no ball game signs, then going all the way down to Mayfield. Then if you realise where Mayfield is, it's like probably a quarter mile to the bottom of the road. You turn left, another 2 or 3 minutes and Croydon Athletic Stadium's there. So it's like a big massive L shape. So a lot of the kids and young adults at that time were always out playing football as well. So that was really my earliest development into actually going and joining a team.
How old are you at that point?
I joined Thornton Rangers, I think at under 9s, you know.
Okay, so
Yeah, it was either under 9s or under 10s. A lot of my teammates went to my primary school, then we all ended up going to secondary school together. So throughout my earliest kind of football journey, I grew with that team as well. We had a manager called Andy at that time.
What was it that drew you to football initially? Was it like just friends around you playing, or was there like a player that inspired you around that time? What was it that kind of drew you in and to stick with it?
Being a lifelong Arsenal fan, I'll probably say when I first started watching Match of the Day, the likes of obviously Ian Wright at that time, I grew up in a generation where social media wasn't even a thing. We barely had mobile phones. So like in an old school way, we just used to watch Match of the Day. And a lot of the black players especially at that time, it's like you go out on the streets and you try and emulate them as well. But then I also had friends that were in music. Obviously, I haven't got a musical bone in my body, so if I can't go into music, it was really football, to be honest. I remember probably being around 8 or 9, whilst I joined Thornton Rangers, my brother played for the older age group. And I remember him telling me one time, yeah, you're never going to make it. And I think that was like the first sign for where I kind of had the fire to try and prove my brother wrong and be better than him. So football wasn't just about me playing. I was always in a battle or competition with my brother, literally up until the time I actually went into Crystal Palace.
So you mentioned joining the Palace Academy. What was, up to that point, how did you, first of all, get that shot? And also kind of more broadly, what was opportunity like these times for like a young, guy from growing up in South London, Ugandan heritage? What was the landscape of like opportunity for you back then?
You know what really helped me? I think probably from around 10, I knew the London Underground. So traveling from east to south to north, I was fortunate enough to excel from my Sunday league team, then going to play for my school. Then from my school, played for the county. From the county, I played for Surrey. So I got to like a really good grassroots level where school-wise, I was playing with some of the best talents, probably around Croydon and South East London as well. So I remember specific playing for Croydon schools, and we'll play like South East London. And like you had the best in South East, then North, then East as well, and West as well. So I got to experience literally all of the best kids my age group across the whole of London. So when I was traveling to and from football, I actually bumped into some of them and just like made friends as well. So I think the good thing for me was, whilst I had football, I was also really into athletics as well. And I ran for Croydon County, then the district. So up until the time I actually got scouted for Crystal Palace, I'd managed to have quite a good athletic like resume or career, if you want to call it that. So if I never made it into Palace, I'd have probably gone into athletics. But then the opportunity for Crystal Palace came when I was invited on behalf of Croydon schools to go for a trial. And this was like probably like 40 or 50 different trialists at that time. But fortunate enough for myself, it was the first time I believe the club put on like a community showcase back then. And out of the trialists, I remember playing centre back with a striker who was my friend. And throughout the game, I was just aggressive, like kicking, heading, like breaking people's legs if I have to, obviously in the right way without getting sent off. Then really taking the aggression and everything I'd learned from my childhood and going into football with a completely different mindset as well. So when I went through that trial, I got asked to come back for 6 weeks.
Was there a noticeable difference from the level you'd played at to going into that kind of academy system? Was it a bit of a shock to the system, or did it just kind
I
of come
think my
naturally?
first, what did we play? My first academy game was Millwall. Then we played Tottenham, but the Millwall game was an eye-opener. So I already had I had one friend called Ben Kajodi who played for Croydon schools, who was in Palace's academy. But the first game, it felt like I slept for a week when I got home. That's how tired and unfit I was. So I just remember that game being probably even like over my career, the hardest point for me. But then what it done for me was make me realize the level that I need to get to. So whilst I was on trial, pre-season, I used to run with a guy called Lewis Spence, who was 2 years older at the time. And he lived in Elephant. I was staying in Tower Bridge at my mum's. Then we used to do like London bridges, so Blackfriars, Lambeth, Waterloo, do a lot of the 5, 10, 15K runs. Then by the time I was on my trial and getting fitter, I began to realize the difference in my fitness levels compared to everyone else. Whereas I came from grassroots, I wasn't really technical, but I began to have an understanding of how the football academy system works, from me being able to come in there as a centre back and really propel what I believed was my best version of leadership, tactical awareness, and really honing in on like a defensive partnership with my friend Michael Kamara at that time.
Nice. What kind of players were around the academy at that time? I know you were in a matchday squad when John Bostock made his debut, I believe.
Yeah.
He was kind of, a bit of a wonder kid as well.
You know, it's crazy. Johnny was, I think, 14, 15. But Palace was unique at that time. So our academy, the academy director, Gary Izzet, he'd come over from Tottenham. I think Nathaniel Klein was at Tottenham, or he brought him over. So whilst Nathaniel joined, Johnny was like wanted by every club you can imagine. Victor Moses was scoring like 10 goals for his school. winning nationals and everything else as well. So I got to experience two of the best talents probably in like world football for their age at that time as well. So Johnny made his debut at Watford where I was on the bench. At that time, Peter Taylor got sacked. Neil Warnock came in. We played proper gaffer. I remember we played Watford, and I don't know whether Palace still have it now. The tunnel's really narrow. So I remember walking out. Johnny's obviously gone to sit on the bench where we were sitting next to each other. I remember seeing a guy called Danny Shu, and I'm a centre back, probably like 60 something kg. I looked up, and this guy his shoulders were touching the wall. But then what I realised in that moment with Johnny, he was fearless. So that day, even though I didn't make my debut, he came on taking free kicks, like in the 15 minutes that he played or so. It was incredible. Then the following day, he's come from school into the training ground, and like his idol was Ronaldinho, you know. So a lot of where I saw my teammates and peers like Victor or Johnny and other players that went on, Nathaniel Klein, it was a special time at Palace that, in my opinion, that really built the foundations of their academy.
For sure. You mentioned Warnock coming in. He's kind of, he's retired now, but a cult legend with so many clubs, ones he's managed and otherwise, teams he's played against love him also. Did you have much experience with him as kind of a young player coming through? And what was that like?
I'll say I had positive experiences with the club as a whole. In particular, I think when the gaffer or Neil Warnock came in at that time, we were still apprentices. Or even though I'd signed a professional contract, we still had to help the youth team wash boots and like do jobs and stuff as well. So I think for the likes of players like Victor, they were still grounded because the gaffer still made them do things as apprentices to kind of keep them on the ground as well. I knew going into that first team because of my size and where I was, like technically, it was harder for me to come into an academy at 16 and within a year and a half go and really kick on and get into the first team as well. So at the back of my mind, even though Neil Warnock released me, I was sent out to Weymouth. They were in a conference, got non-league experience, came back to Palace, and his reasons for releasing me, I never really had the foundation of like an academy journey. So whereas I came from grassroots, I took being released in a positive way because I was like, okay, if I've got to this level, maybe if I drop down like a couple of tiers, I can build myself up whilst I fill out and obviously continue to work on my technical side of the game as well. So when I got released from Palace, I went to Bromley.
So you mentioned your release from Palace. I mean, you have quite a refreshing lens on it. So I think naturally it can be a difficult time for young players. Maybe, as you said, players that have gone through from a younger age might find it more difficult because they've not known anything different. So yeah, I think that's super refreshing. But was there any kind of lows in that moment, or was it really just positive?
No. When there's two sides of it. Obviously, no one wants to be released, but I think obviously, whereas this is called perspectives, to give an insight to your audience, I'm coming from like the streets, and my version of us being in the streets and playing out, and a lot of what was happening in my life before football, I was basically living like a grown man in a young man's body, or young kid's body as well. So I had several experiences in a negative light. Me just being at Palace, like as a whole, was like the holy grail in my mind as well. So I went into the club and really tried my best. But even with my best, I knew just because of the development I had with Andy Brogan and the managers I had before Neil Warnock, I was always told like there's no guarantees in football. And I remember one specific time, Gary, when we used to train at Trinity for pre-season, sat the academy down and he was like, we'll be lucky as a club if one or two make it. And this journey doesn't last forever. So whilst I was, 17, 18, listening to that, that stuck in the back of my mind when bad issues or negative things happen in football. And I feel the way I was told how I got released, I'd gone from being Scholar of the Year and Young Player of the Year in a short space of time. That was ahead of the likes of Victor and Johnny as well. So I could only take the positives out of negative situation, especially being a Palace fan as well. So I knew at 18, if I give myself a platform, I've learnt so much, 100%, I can now go to a lower team and continue to do that. So for example, before under 21s, there was reserves. I captained our youth team and the reserve team. So I was already used to, as a centre back, dictating and telling older senior players, here, do this, do that, because I knew I was doing the work anyway. So if I wasn't putting in what I was doing at that time, I couldn't have those conversations. So it's almost like me going out on my sword and saying, every time we cross this line, I've done everything in my power to get to this stage as well. And I took that mentality when I went into Bromley.
Facts. So obviously you ended up at Bromley.
Yeah.
But how did as a young player, as you said, kind of raised from the streets, being released by a Premier League or Championship club at the time.
Yeah.
How did the footballing world kind of treat you as someone trying to get back on the footballing ladder? And how did the Bromley deal come about?
So you know what, at that time, London was a unique place. Like even at Palace, we was out still playing football in the streets. So because of my journey into Palace and my relationship with one of my best mates in football at the time, Michael Kamara, Michael had a friend from Peckham. So whilst I was with my mum and my aunt lived in Peckham, we was always playing football at Damalola Taylor Centre. Then we'll go to a place in Lewisham called Catford Pits. From Catford Pits, we'll go to a place round the corner from where my mum lived called Tabard. So even at Palace, we're always out playing like street football anyway. So I never had an agent. I didn't really know how football worked. So back then, the PFA at the time, they'll have, I believe, delegates, and Dougie Freeman was the delegate for the young players as well. So when Dougie was learning his coaching badges, he helped the youth team develop a lot of his training, or the youth team helped him with his like level 2 or 3 or whatever it was at that time as well. So when the PFA used to come in, we'll do like sessions and be like, oh, tell us about pensions and insurance. And we just used to sign papers. Nobody's agent weren't there at the time. So I used to think the PFA manage every other player and that's the agent. But I had a friend called Marcus, and I was like, oh, Marcus, how'd you get to another club? Or now I'm at Bromley. Fortunate enough for me, I played 10 games, got loads of man of the matches, but I was playing defensive midfield at the time. So I found it quite refreshing because the players weren't up to the standard of obviously Palace players. But I told my friend Marcus, if you can get a list of all of the Football League clubs from Championship, League 1 and League 2, it was easier back then to get like a reserve game or like come in on trial. And obviously I'm coming in for free anyway. But what I didn't realise, you're meant to tell Bromley. So my friend Marcus called every club, and the only 2 clubs that came back were Port Vale and Lincoln. So spoke to Lincoln, but then Marcus isn't a football agent. So Marcus used to say to me, pretend to be me, tell them my name, speak directly to the club.
Yeah.
And I remember speaking to the club secretary and like I had to change my voice. So they were like, yeah, come to Lincoln. We're playing Port Vale, I think on a Tuesday, but then I trained for Bromley on a Tuesday. So I had another friend that was going to university in Lincoln, called him, was like, yeah, come up, stay with me. He was staying outside Lincoln in a place called Sprillerton. So I've gone up on a train, went to New York Northgate, went to Lincoln. It was a completely different like culture shock. But I remember playing that game, and at that time I was like, nah, this is too easy. So got man of the match, spoke to the assistant manager, and he was like, oh, when do you need to be back in London? I was like, I don't really need to go back. Is there another game? It was like, we're playing on Thursday. We played Walsall on Thursday. Then the following day, he was like, we want you to stay up. And I'm like, I kind of have to go home because I got training. So Marcus called Bromley, Mark Goldberg at that time, turned around and like told him I was ill. Then the following week, I stayed with my friend. Then that following week, Lincoln were like, yeah, we want to sign you. So I was like, oh yeah, what do I need to do? Again, Marcus had to call the club, speak to different people, speak to the Lincolnshire Echo. So up until the time I actually joined Lincoln, I wasn't actually meant to be there because you have to put in what they call like a 7-day window. So then when Mark Goldberg and I spoke and he gave me the opportunity to leave, I'd left Lincoln. But a unique part of the story was the editor of the Lincolnshire Echo was like, oh, who's your agent? And I was like, oh, a guy called Marcus. Then he was like, "Oh, you and Marcus sound the same." I was like, "Yeah, everyone in South London
No.
sounds the same anyway." So signed at Lincoln. Then that's what really took my career. That's where my career started.
Yeah. Were they League Two or League One at the time?
Lincoln were in League Two at the time.
League Two.
Yeah.
Well, that must have been like quite a nice moment, personally at least, to be like,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
back.
It was,
Like, on, do you know what I mean?
yeah, it was strange because I had a friend that lived in Lincoln. He left uni. He stayed there. Even though Marcus was my quote unquote agent, he never actually came to Lincoln. But then I didn't have a need to go back to London. So a lot of where I developed in Lincoln, I remember walking in probably the second day of me signing. So Ife Onura, who's at the PFA, and Peter Jackson, I remember going to Ife and I was like, "How do I become captain?" And they were like, "Look, Moses, slow down, play some first team games." So I played against, who was it? Who did I play against? My debut. I made my debut, but then what I didn't realise with my debut, even though we drew 1-1, we had a player called Frank Sinclair. So Frank played for Chelsea. He was at the back end of his career, and he was having issues with the manager. So the gaffer was honest. He was like, "I don't really want to play you. I don't think you're ready, but we're gonna play you." Played Morecambe. We drew 1-1, and I'd gone from speaking to the gaffer all the time to getting on the coach, and he just shook his head at me. I was thinking, "Huh? Like, what's going on?" So then the following morning, he pulled me in his office, and he was like, "I don't think you're ready, but I've got no choice to play you again." I'm like, "Why is he telling me this?" Like, I'm going into games, and like, it was messing up in my head. But what he was telling me was, I was out of my depth because I was still playing like I was at Palace. And obviously, when you drop down the league, if the manager says head kick and do this, you have to do it. So even though we drew and I was trying things, I listened. And the next 10 games, I got 10 man of the matches, didn't come out the team. And from January till May, I'd gone from playing those 10 games and winning Young Player of the Year.
You're now in like a professional dressing room, right?
Mhm.
There's players, like you said, used to play for Chelsea,
Yeah.
different stages of their careers. Obviously, some people might not know, but like League Two football, you're making money, but you're not making Premier League money.
Mhm.
I'm wondering, in the dressing room, what's the kind of mood or like the culture around like money, status, influence?
Yeah, that's a
in that
great
kind of
question.
dressing room?
I think, it wasn't until Chris Sutton, I want to go forward and back. So it wasn't until Chris Sutton actually came in and his version of where he believes standards were for League Two players. A lot of what football did at that time was, even though I'd gone in there as a young player, money wasn't really a prominent thing because, like, what did I sign? I signed like £500 a week with bonuses of like £250, depending on where we finish our cup games. So if I'd had a good week, I could make like £1,000 a week, if that makes sense. So I was what, 20, 21? So I think no one was on crazy wages like that. And more importantly, what the club did, which was good, at that time we signed some players from London who happened to be my friends. So they gave us a house. We lived in that house as well. So we're going back, 15 years? Rent in Lincoln was like £300-400. So when we're talking about living costs, the living costs were ultra low. And more importantly, you actually play for the biggest team in that city as well. So money wasn't really a thing up until that point. It was much more around how do we be the best players for Lincoln than progress, because players have come, gone, they've been sold, and like every manager I had, their onus was always around young players' development and moving them on as well. So being at Lincoln in my earliest career, I became captain probably into my first full season. I got the number 5 shirt, and at that time, that was like the golden goose, if that makes sense as well. So mixing the balance between senior players and young players, it wasn't really until, if I'm going to be honest, the real underlying issue started where my friend who was at Lincoln was obviously a prominent drug dealer at that time, and we signed Delroy Facey. So Delroy came into Lincoln as a bigger Premier League player because of his history. Then the earliest development for me was, okay, now we have the London boys and football has different sections within teams. It weren't until that Northampton, or before the Northampton game, the real crack started to come into it with my first introduction into match fixing.
So you spent, I think, 4 seasons at Lincoln?
In total, I was there 3 years.
3 years.
Yeah, so from trial to the season I had, like, in total.
Yeah. Obviously, you won Young Player of the Year one season, became club captain at a point. What ultimately led to you leaving the club, and kind of, I guess, what was the next part of your footballing journey?
Yeah, to be honest, I'll say both on and off the pitch, my life was literally spiraling. At that time, a few of my friends had been killed in London. Being in Lincoln actually kept me away from all of the noise back there. My friend who I was living with became more prominent within his own empire. That brought heat. I remember one specific time, Ian Pearce pulled me after we played Telford in the FA Cup. And he was like, "Oh, Moses, your house is going to be raided for drugs." And I was like, "Drugs?" So then he turned around and he was like, "We know it's not you, but whoever you're around, you need to tell them to get rid of whatever." But it didn't really sink in at that time. And again, in my mind, I was thinking, well, even though it's not got anything directly to do with me, I've called my friend, told him, "Did you keep anything at the house? Because we live together." And he was like, "No, it's not. There's nothing there." Why? What have they said? I was like, "I'll talk to you when I get back to Lincoln." So police have raided the house, didn't find any drugs, but probably a year left into my contract, managers changed, Steve Tilson's come in, and I remember getting arrested in Lincoln Tesco's. So because of my friend, the superintendent was good friends with the chairman at the time, and the superintendent's the one that told Ian Pearce about the drug bust. So when I've relayed that information to my friend, I remember the detective who was leading the investigation called me when I was coming back to London. And he was like, "The club have given me your number. I'm detective such and such. This individual's been doing X, Y, and Z. Can you come in for a voluntary interview?" And I was like, respectfully, why would I do that? So the following week, I've driven into Newark, and Lincoln's such a small place, everyone knows everyone. As I'm driving, I was speeding, but I got stopped by the police, then I got points. But then these are the same officers that see me at football all the time. So I've gone into Tesco's, as I've paid for my shopping, I've gone and like not scanned in a self-service back then. So as I'm leaving, security guard who I know, I live probably a few streets from where Tesco's was. They're like, we've had to call the police. And I was like, what are the police gonna do? Like, have I not paid for something? Had the coins. I remember I'm on the phone to my sister. She's like, "Don't leave, they know who you are." And I'm like, "Sarah, this is crazy. I don't know what's happening." So I've literally got my shopping bags. Police have come in. They're like, "Where is he?" They've arrested me, put me in cuffs. And it was so comical at that time because I was arrested for theft. So I was like, "Why don't you check the cameras?" Gone into training the next day. I remember specifically going in to tell Steve Tilson. He was like, "I already know." I was thinking, this is weird. Gone into training, the boys are bantering, laughing. But Delray was the one person that stood up. He was captain at that time, and it was like, "Moses, stand up." He said to me, "Did you steal the chicken?" I was like, "Come on, bro. Of course I didn't steal the chickens." "All right, everyone boycott the Lincolnshire Echo." But remember, we had players on loan from Villa and United at that time. So when the club or the players boycotted the Echo, the gaffer came to me and was like, "Look, you're not in my plans. This is how much money we need to get you off the wage bill. January's coming up, find another club." And I'm thinking, I can't call Marcus. This ain't something Marcus can deal with. Let me call the PFA. Call the PFA. Then I'm like, this has happened. And I remember Nick Kushak at the time. He was like, "Look, we're going to help you." But then the craziest thing was, I think we played Barnet. We've come back. I had to go and answer bell. So as I've gone to bell, they're like, "Yeah, you got no further action for the chicken." Bearing in mind, Lincolnshire Echo put me, Tesco, and a chicken in like their main page. So I'm going into games now, and I'm thinking like, my head was gone. At that time, this was probably the most difficult period for me in football. So I remember playing Bradford at home. First 5 minutes into the game, they've pinged the ball back stick, and I think the strikers headed the ball over. And I remember just being so blank and empty, like my head was gone. We ended up losing the game, come out the ground. This kid was probably like 10. So as I'm walking, we used to wear like a suit and everything to the ground. I'm walking back to my car. I remember him screaming, he's like, "Hey, Swaibu." I was like, "Oh, what's happening? Do you want me to sign your thing?" He's like, no, you're I was thinking, like, that's probably the lowest point in football. And as I looked at the kid, the dad's like, oh, come on, son, you can't say. He's like, no, he was Then I looked, I was like, damn, man, it's time. It's time to go. So gone back to the station. When I was in the station, they're like, we're going to rearrest you. I was like, rearrest me for what? They're like, yeah, we think, not even we think, you've stolen a newspaper. So I was like, we've gone from the chicken, no further action, newspaper, no evidence, no anything. January's come round and the club wanted me gone so much from the morning of training. I had one of my good friends, Mustafa Carrier, he's from Peckham. So we're doing like a keep ball game. Then the loser has to wash boots. So I've lost, I've lost the game. And the gaffer was like, wash the boots. I was like, I'm not washing the boots. He's like, wash the boots. Like, I'm not washing the boots. Then he was like, we're gonna fine you. I was like, fine me. Walk back to the house. Had to go back into training. He was like, look, how much money do you want to leave? So I was given an amount from January to the end of my contract, which was 6 months with severance. Then that amount throughout the day changed 4 times. The 5th offer, they were like, just go. So left Lincoln, mutual consent, drove back down to London. Then literally the following day, all the charges were dropped. So money hit my bank account. Police contacted me. Like when I got back to my mum's, they were like, look, no further action.
Did you feel like there was like some racial profiling going on?
Before we get into like the wider scope of what was happening, I remember my time at Lincoln, London was hot for 2 summers. Before I left Lincoln, I had a friend called Jamie. Jamie was from Huddersfield. So Jamie's family or brothers at the time, they were in the streets in Huddersfield, so there was a shooting at his house. I remember when Chris Sutton and Ian Pearce were at the club, Jamie's driven into the training ground, and at that time, they wanted me to be captain. So Jamie was like, oh, Mo, can you go talk to the gaffer? I can't go back home. So I was like, oh, let me go and have a word with Chris. So as I've gone to speak to Chris, first thing I said, I was like, gaffer, is like, Moses, come in, sit down, what's up? All I got to was Jamie. And when I got to the end of Jamie, he was like, I don't want anything to do with him. He needs to leave, he's overweight, this, that, the third. But as I was about to explain what Jamie's going through, I knew the risks of Jamie going back to Huddersfield. So Gaffer's basically kicked me out of his room. I've gone back to the car. At the time, Jamie had a VW Golf GTI. So then Jamie's leaning back into the car. And I was like, look, Jake, just come and stay with me and my friend in Lincoln. So Jamie had, what did he have? He had a towel, like wrapped in something. I was like, bro, what is that? So no word of a lie, right? So Jamie's sitting to the right of me. I've looked. I'm like, that ain't what I think it is. He was like, no, I'm gonna do a madness. And as he's unwrapped it, Jamie had a semi-automatic Uzi in the car, loaded fully. So I'm thinking, bro, I'm from where I'm from. I'm in football. And I'm like, you can't even drive, or like, bro, you can't do this. Then at that time, I knew from then, Jamie was gone. So with or without football, his path was what it was. And obviously, he ended up going to prison for quite a long time. So before the end of my career at Lincoln, when I was going back to London, my friends or my older friends from Lincoln got caught up in a case. Their case resulted in me being identified as someone who was driving a car. At that time, luckily for me, I never drove, didn't have a license. I've spent 6.5 weeks at Guildford Crown Court for handling stolen goods or stealing cars. Chris Sutton or Ian Pearce was sent to court. He's come, given evidence. Moses is gonna be a future Premier League star, etc. So I ended up missing the whole of pre-season on a trial at Crown Court in Guildford. By the time I've come back to Lincoln, one of the reasons why I couldn't go back to London or go home, it wasn't really the safest place. And more importantly, my friends are going to jail, people getting lengthy sentences. Remember, I'm from Croydon, so a lot of my friends in music or Conan, me and him were like that growing up. Another friend of mine, like my best friend Bouncer, Miles, he was, yeah, these guys were deep in the streets at that time. So whilst I'm playing football and I'm hearing these stories, my friend Oliver's been stabbed, he's been killed. I'm still having to play football, but football is really masking all of the things that I was probably dealing with internally. And those days when I weren't playing football, it was probably eating up at me in ways where by the time I've left Lincoln, I've gone back to London, but in that time, I've been introduced to match fixers, all of this stuff's happening around, so I needed football. But then to answer your question, I don't want to sound or make excuses because whilst I knew what was happening, I don't think I really had the people or the environment where I can sit someone down and be like, look, this is what I'm going through. So a lot of where my own journey started to kick in, I was so used to doing things on my own. I'm like, I can make my own decisions. You know, let me just focus here. Let me now go on trial. As I'm going on trial, I ended up at Dagenham and Redbridge. Then from Dagenham, I went to Kettering. I've gone to Kettering now, but I still had like my severance money and money I've saved. So I wasn't spending any money in Lincoln and I moved back to my mum. So gone to Kettering, got hit with a transfer embargo. No one at the club's being paid. All the first team players didn't turn up. So now we're playing with youth team players. We're losing like 7 and 8-0 in games. So I'm thinking, raw. I'm 23. My girlfriend's pregnant. I'm like, what am I going to do next? So luckily for me, Bromley got back into contact. So whilst Bromley got back into contact with me, I went and re-signed with Bromley with a signing on fee and like £800 a week in cash. So as I've gone and done that, they gave me 10 grand, which was quite unusual in that league. But because of what I'd done before and where they saw the value in, I've ended up signing for Bromley. But at that time, Bromley, I'll say before the start of the season, I was reintroduced to match fixing by a teammate just jogging around. No one believed me. They're like, oh, Mo, you know, there's this thing called match fixing. I was like, yeah, that's real. That happened at Lincoln. So he was like, oh yeah, let's just go to this meeting. But at that time, I'll probably say football was still something that was close to my heart. But then at the other side, I'm like, damn, what am I going to do now? Because this ain't going to last forever. I can hear Gary's voice bubbling around my head. What am I going to do next? And I was like, let me just go to this meeting. Then that was probably the biggest turning point for me where I'd gone from there to avoiding all of these things to now it's just like full, this is what I'm going to do next.
Yeah. Before we get properly into the match fixing stuff, like, obviously we spoke about your release from Palace and how you took it so positively. At this sort of couple years in your career, you've got shootings going on, drug offence accusations, you're having a child. Like, this must have been exhausting.
You know what though, yeah? I think this is more so for us in regards to my community. It's like, not even with myself, but there's so much of this that happens every day, it actually becomes normal. So even though I was going through what I was going through, it was so normalized because now I'm back in London, this is everyday life. So it weren't just the shootings and like, even now we're going to football. There was a few times I've gone to where we play in Tabard and I'm like, things have changed. I haven't been there for like 2 or 3 years. Or it's like these kids who I've seen like here, why are they in a corner and they're in a corner and like 2 or 3 minutes later, someone's running in there with like a samurai sword. And I'm like, what's happening? So a lot of and remember at that time, a young Jordan Ibe was at Liverpool. So Jordan was one of these kids that probably was the most high profile player at that time. So a lot of where my understanding was just living in London and so much chaos, it was something that was so normalized because that's what a lot of us were used to at that time, without realizing, hey, obviously as you get older, it's not safe, and more importantly, none of us actually speak and communicate. So if you're going through it, we're just continuing to go through it without having the right network or people that can really help us. And I feel whilst I was at Palace and I was protected, football never really had the education that I believe it should have provided. And that isn't with me, that's with other players like Jamie. You know, that one conversation I may have had with a gaffer could have changed his whole life and the outcome of what that is. You know, a lot of my friends who are going in and out of prison, by the time match fixings come into my life, I could have gone to prison for a crime I didn't even commit. or a lot of what I was doing off the pitch, I was just around people who weren't doing the right things as well. So I don't want to make excuses when I say this, but it was so normalized, it should have been rooted into the game, because the game not only gave me and us protection, we never once played football and thought, hey, we're going to be multi-millionaires. I knew if I work hard, success will come and you're going to be rewarded from it. So I'd gone from thinking like that to now I'm like, okay, cool, you know what? Let's go into this meeting, let's see what happens. But at that time, the law and the idea of getting paid and almost living a lifestyle without actually playing football, I was like, okay, well, we train twice a week. We get paid half check, half cash. Why? I didn't understand it at that time. So I'm thinking, if these guys give us money, is that illegal? Then I'm sitting down with probably like some of the most highly organized people in the space of gambling and betting in the world, even today, without realizing who they were. And I'm like, I'm now being taught how this system works. So there was the football I know, then there's the other side of football that nobody knows and understands. So leading to the time of like police and the match fixing, it became so normalized. I found every reason to try and justify why I'm about to do what I'm going to do. So I had to ask myself so many questions as to, is it right? Is it wrong? What if this happens? What if that happens? Okay, what if we get paid? What if we don't get paid? Then as you make these decisions, I've gone into that meeting in Mayfair Hotel, given those instructions, and my teammates were hesitant. But then in my mind, and football did this, you don't really know who is your friend and who isn't. So my attachment to my teammates, I'm like, look, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it. If we're not going to do it, we're not going to do it. But with or without us, it's going to happen anyway. So it's either we're all going to do it or I'm going to do it on my own. And that was the real start into what spiraled out of control with match fixing.
Yeah. So that first meeting, obviously I'm sure there's things you can and can't say, but like your friend mentioned it to you training, you've gone to this meeting in a Mayfair hotel. I'm not asking who was the person, but like, what does this person look like? How, you know what I mean? Were they in sportswear? Were they in a suit?
Yeah, I can easily describe that. Yeah. So we've gone into Mayfair Hotel. The main person who organised this meeting, he didn't know English. He's probably like 5 foot. So remember, he's sitting on the bed. His feet couldn't even touch the ground. The translator's standing up.
But where was he from, sorry?
They were Chinese.
Chinese, yeah.
Yeah, translator standing up. And there was another guy just standing by the door. So it's like a seat like this. The players on the bed and they're like, look, we know you're playing Eastbourne tomorrow. We need 2 goals before the first half. You guys will be paid this amount of money, but here's some money coming to the meeting. So again, because we're paid half check, half cash, the other players are like, okay, can we get in trouble for this?
When you say the other players, how much of the squad was there?
Or... So there was me and 4 other players.
Yeah.
Yeah, me and 4 other players. And the person that introduced or organised the meeting. Yeah. So whilst we were given a bag, I knew how much it was I knew how thick and in my mind how much it was. So as they've given us the instructions, we were told to let the introducer know what we want to do. By the time I got back to the car, I already made my mind up. And then when everyone opened the envelopes, everyone had £5 each before we even kicked the ball or done anything. And you have to remember, to give an insight, some of these players are on like £100 or £200. And that's a lot of money at that time for that level as well. So whilst they contemplated, should we do it or shouldn't we do it, nobody actually knew what they were actually going into. So when we got to Eastbourne had the scoreboard behind the goal and they had sent someone to watch the game. So I remember we had a striker called Charles Adamina that I used to play with, and he was the best striker, in my opinion, at that level as well. So I was like, okay, as a centre-back, how would this work if I'm playing left side or right side, but then he can run down my blind spot and no one would really know? So as the game kicks off, everything I thought we were going to do was actually going against what was actually happening. So the players at the meeting were all attacking, hitting the post, you know, going 1v1 with the keeper, barely missing, but they couldn't physically go on a pitch and play bad, if that makes sense. So then one of the players who wasn't at that meeting was running to the box, giving away a penalty. Charles had scored 1-0. Looked up at the clock. It was probably on the 40th minute. We all started panicking. And one of the wingers at the time who was at the meeting, 44th minute, he's got beat, but he's running back. But he hasn't ran to the winger. He's ran into the box. As the wingers crossed it, he's crossed it just above his head and he just held his hand out, or his left hand. Ball's hit his hand, blatant penalty. Charles has stepped up, 45th minute, he's gone and scored. So in my mind, I'm thinking, obviously the fixers come in, gone into the change room, but we were told to play normal. So even though we ended up losing the game, at that time I had a white Mercedes and the middleman messaged me after the game, was like, "Oh, come to the car park, I'm coming back with you." So I was like, "Oh yeah, we're getting paid." He's like, yeah, don't worry, we're getting paid. Let's head into Knightsbridge. They booked a hotel in Knightsbridge. So all of the players are calling me like, "Oh, Moses, did the money come in?" And I'm like, "You guys didn't do what you said." Then as I'm sitting down with a French guy, and he's like, "Hey, Moses, look, I'm going to give you all the money, or I'm going to take half the money. These guys didn't do it. This isn't how the business works." So he'd managed to convince me not to pay the players the money that we were given. By that time, I was like, yeah, why are they going to be paid if I've taken all the risks? So as we've gone to Knightsbridge, the money never arrived. And to give perspective, I found out within 24 hours how the system worked, like straight away. Money comes from Asia, they penetrate their businesses in London, then the money's paid out through restaurants, casinos at that time. So we went and booked into the Mayfair Hotel. I was told to go Canning Town, met one of the mules who had the money. He came and gave like 100 or something grand at that time in the bags. I've driven from Canning Town over Tower Bridge, over the city, straight to Mayfair, gone into the Mayfair Hotel. The players are like, yeah, we're going to get paid. Had an argument, was there for another hour. I've taken basically the bulk of the money. They kept their 5 grand and that was the first fix.
Few questions off the back of that. Obviously, we've spoken at length about kind of environmental factors, what was going on in your personal life. But you said you got to the car and decided, I'm going to go ahead and do this with the match fixing. What was that final sort of pendulum swing that made you go, I'm going to do it?
You know what? It wasn't until I realized after the argument with the players, remember that was the first game, I looked at the league and I was like, there's like 42 games. Surely this can't happen every day. Then the twister for me was when I was driving back, I had my Bluetooth at that time connected to the phone. So the French guy was playing that French rap, he's connected it in Canning Town and the boss actually called him with a translator. But then the boss said something like, did the players get paid? So whilst he's trying to convince me to not pay the players, I was like, "Oh, boss, no, this is Moses." He was like, "Oh, let me speak to him directly." And he was like, "I need to make sure they're going to get paid, but tomorrow, come and meet him." He wanted me to take over what the middleman was doing. By that time, I didn't realize the middleman had previously taken some money from a separate fix. So when we went to the Bureau de Change to change some of the money, he disappeared. Then I had the direct link, if you want to call it that, to the main boss at that time. Then the following week, they told me what their plan was to not only fix the league, but how they're going to expand it and where they wanted me placed, with an understanding how operational their whole system worked.
That's crazy. So obviously there's Chinese people involved, there's a French guy involved, the scale's large, presumably. Was there so for the first game, for example, before that second goal's gone in, and you're thinking, this is going wrong, I'm concerned now. What was your fear at that point? Had they given an impression of what could go wrong?
No, you know what? How can I answer this? I'll say the fear was like, if there were, well, I wouldn't call it fear, but it's like, when I don't know how it is for other people, but it's like, when you've given someone your word to do something, and I'm taking myself back to that time, I knew what I was gonna do. So at that meeting, we'd left and I was like, I'm doing it. But then I quickly realized those players haven't had my experiences or my journey into football. So I'm thinking way back when we met Del, or when Dell introduced us to the Russian match fixer, and it was around 60,000 at that time, and I was like, if we're being paid half check, half cash, and again, in my mind, I'm still in direct contact with Mark Goldberg, so I was captain of Bromley. There was a period we stopped getting paid from Bromley. So I was like, we're not being paid. I have to ask the gaffer when we're being paid. He's turning around and saying, well, unless you start winning, you know, the team starts winning, I need to mirror back to the boys what's happening. And I'm thinking, he's just giving me more reasons to justify why I'm going to go and fix games. And it was probably around New Year's, he sent me a message. I was having my daughter, or my partner was being induced, and he said, if you don't turn up to training, you're going to be fined, whilst I had to see the midwife. I remember seeing that text and I was like, you know what? The club don't care about you. The manager don't care about you. For the players who needed the money, I'd managed to give them like a couple of grand because they were never not going to tell or say, oh, that's match fixing. But I remember sitting down and I was like, you know, with or without you guys, this is going to happen. But what I didn't realize was the speed of how they were able to not only penetrate that league, but reach other players as well. Then I quickly began to understand, probably like from just after 3 months, how illegal betting works and how to get liquidity in the market and how to move markets depending on who's gambling and betting. Whilst the players were paid 5 grand, 10 grand in the beginning, the odds were very much different throughout that season because he had quite a lot of control as well. Then I started to ask questions like, I'm not being paid enough. And I remember him specifically saying, like, a greedy man doesn't see properly, like, calm down. And I was like, these guys don't even care about me. So even though I was making money, and a lot of it at that time, I couldn't physically go out and spend that money. I couldn't physically go and buy the things I may have wanted. So I was like, the version of money weren't really what I expected it to be, because why is it so hard to do these things as well? So I'll probably say halfway through the season, I was so deep rooted into my justification, I became numb.
See, it's interesting. You kind of said how quickly they were able to tap up other players, and even your own personal perspective, it feels like it was one thing, quickly became another, and snowballs until you're entrenched in this stuff, right? With that in mind, like, how widespread is or was corruption in league football at that point? Because people, like, fans will say, oh, this is rigged, the referee's being paid off. Like, people say stuff, but it might actually be surprising, by the sounds of it, how, like, crazy that was at this time.
In our league?
Yeah.
Or the whole league?
Either.
I'll say, in at that time, half of the, so I'll say probably like 10 teams. Yeah, 10 teams.
That's surprising.
To be fair, I'll give you an example. It's like, it may be surprising because we're in the UK, right? But then it's not surprising if you think about it, like, this stuff's happening outside of the UK, but it's coming back into the UK because of the money that's being played with. So for example, they don't just bet on football, they're betting on sport. It's not just one person doing it. There's thousands of people looking at these games, getting information transmitted later at that time with delays, but then they can easily turn around and be like, I want you to score 1-0, or I want you to score 1 goal in 5 minutes. Then after you've done that, the score needs to be 3-0 before 35 minutes. Then in the second half, we need a 1-1 draw between both teams. It may sound like it's hard to do, but what happens when you've got 5 players here and 5 players here? Then 5 players here and 5 players here meet in the Mayfair Hotel and tell each other exactly what's going to happen within these minutes. So if I've got 100 grand and these people can control odds and markets, they can turn around, and this is just hypotheticals. Imagine 8-1 on 100 grand, and knowing exactly how that spread bet has been put on an Asian handicap on their legal side, you can make 8 million.
Jeez.
You know, when I mean 8 million, hypothetical again, you don't see what they're doing in Asia. But what you do see is, okay, well, if they do make 8 million, where does this money go? how comes they own this and they own that? And remember, we're in the UK and London at the heart of where all of this stuff's happening. So when I'm going to get the money or take the money, I'm going to one or two locations where even I'm like, right, you know what? This is mad, because the people who are behind this, they're never who you really expect. Or I remember a fix has happened and it takes 24 hours for the money to come. But on this specific time, the boss was like, someone's coming from Manchester to drop it. So again, someone could be anyone. I was given the details. I was the other side of Tower Bridge in Wapping. So cars pulled up, I was like, oh, where's the car? It was a man, a woman, and 3 kids in the back. So they're driven all the way from Manchester. The guy looked, turned around, opened the boot. I took the bag. I walked over the bridge, looked in the bag, and I'm like, oh shit. So they'd taken probably 3 hours to get into London and 3 hours back in the evening. So when I used to go and collect some of the other money, I'll go in, place an order, they'll give me a bag, I'll go in the back, floor to ceiling. 20s, 50s, readies, like, you know, so when you look at it on that scale, yeah, the match fixing part is one thing, or when people are like, okay, well, players don't get paid. It's always the players that are going to be vulnerable, because those who are paid less are not earning the most. Or the other side, okay, if you look at spot fixing now, which is much more prominent, if you turn around to a player at any level, even at the highest level, and be like, okay, go and get a yellow card or go and get a booking, that could be worth millions of pounds to these people because of the level that they're playing at. But then again, behind the scenes, how many people actually gamble and bet? So if I can turn around and tell you, okay, well, here's my story, there's another side of the story that I know, which is, if you looked at the football ladder in this country, and this probably isn't public, how many athletes bet and gamble? So let's say it's 100, right? So of these 100 players who gamble, they may have some form of addiction at the highest level, but then again, who owns these betting companies? Not the ones you see on the high street or Paddy Power, William Hill, but the ones who may be sponsored by football shirts. So if you look at, let's say it's League One, right, and it's a betting company, if they're not on the high street, where do you think they are? You know, where they're getting their licenses? Are they really regulated? So if I'm a young player now or athlete and I'm like, well, I don't really want to go into Paddy Power, let me go and download this crypto betting app. 2011, they were buying or trying to buy football clubs using the same level of betting. So behind the scenes, what looks like an organized operation and millions of pounds, how easy is it to get a betting license if you actually go do your research? Or how easy is it to market now on social media? Well, 100 people, let's join this Telegram group. Pay me £500 and I can guarantee you games. At that time, I could have guaranteed 99.9% returns on a game that I knew was fixed, that I can control, if you gave me £10. £10 turns into £1,000, the grand turns into 10, 10 turns into 100 grand. So the stage that I was going at in regards to my own deep, darkest core was, okay, well, how do I learn how to do this myself? Because you don't need 5 players to fix, all you need is 1. So if you're a defender and you step left or right and you jump up for a header half-heartedly and someone scores, you can now control whether we move left and right if you're the captain, because of the influence. You can play a low block. You can make your wingers tuck in and play a defensive shape for a period of time and just look at that clock. Then when the handbrake's off, everyone can play normal. Who's really gonna, data can't tell you that. So whilst I've had experiences with consulting for data companies or the biggest in the world, I understood, okay, well, if I know this and the level that I know it at, to answer your question, how widespread is this? So both legal and illegal gambling is worth $1 trillion globally, but then again, it's worth billions in the UK and Europe, just on match manipulation. When you're seeing snooker offences, tennis, football, you know it's the same syndicates that still operate in different ways. When we're looking at now, my journey 15 years ago until now, Now you've got crypto, so they're not going to approach you and be like, I'm a match fixer. I can talk to you online. You'll never know who I am because I can create so many different versions of avatars, if you want to call it that. By the time law enforcement get involved, we was arrested by the National Crime Agency, but I done a podcast. So I got to interview the person who put me in jail. And I think the National Crime Agency were 2 weeks old. Even though that didn't make the BBC cut, the question I asked myself, if the highest version of law enforcement doesn't understand how this looks like and works, how do you expect law enforcement globally to understand how this works? Player gets banned here, it's a civil case. If it's criminal, it's law enforcement. But then if it's criminal, the reputation of football, if it isn't policed or if their integrity is lost, it's reputational damage. You know, if you look at Lucas Paqueta, whichever way it goes, if he doesn't get banned or if he does get banned, at one stage he was worth £100 million. So imagine we can turn around and be like, just so there's not another Paqueta, here's what we're able to do potentially as a company. Or for example, it wasn't until I came out of prison, I think the first club we went into was Manchester United. And when I went into Man United, it was an eye-opener for me because I'm like, raw. It's not even, forget match fixing. What do these young players now have to go through today? So if 90+% of young academy players are getting released, where do you think they're going to end up? How many of them are from London, for example, from my background or my community? So if you get released from Palace, you don't go Man City, you go to Bromley. Bromley in League 2 now. If you can't go to Bromley, you go into non-league. If you go into non-league, you go into the combined counties. Then the lower you get, what happens when you have a child, a girlfriend, a mortgage, a car, finance, because that drop from the Premier League to the academy to now, you're playing at step 12 is really significant. But here comes the bait. Yeah. I don't even need you to match fix, just give me a name. You give me that name, I'll give you £100. That £100 now gets me into a non-league club and I'm like, okay, pre-season you're playing Chatham. I just need you to lose this game. Take £500. Okay, after that, where are you going to sign? Chatham want to give you a contract. That first game, make sure you can see the goal. There's a grand. Okay, after that grand, I need you to fix 2 games. In this 42-game season, I'll give you 10 grand. So in a year, you make 20 grand, but then again, you can pick what game you want to manipulate. And if you look at one example, there's so many different examples I can give you, and the spiral just goes round and round. Yeah. So if you learn how to conquer football, why can't you do it in tennis? Why can't you do it in cricket? Why can't you do it in golf? Again, when I went to United and went to every Premier League club to not only tell them my story, but what I quickly realized from the feedback, I'm like, whoa, it was overwhelming what I was hearing. And I'm like, what are football actually doing? Because there's one thing lawyers, directors, executives turning around and building a framework of what they think players should learn and educate, but there's no better experience than someone who's actually been there. And if that's not me, it could be a whole worldwide view of what's happening now. So I've been very fortunate enough to go to FIFA, to the Olympics, to probably some of the biggest sporting governing bodies to understand globally how this looks like as well. So I quickly realized when I came out of prison, I can't physically change that, but I can build an environment that can. And this was what my real start to building the company, which is Game Changer 360, that I began to understand if you have the best version of education, technology, research and development, academics, law enforcement, whether it's public or private, you can now build a scope of what I believe the education of sport and football is going to look like if we empower the industry by focusing on the retention of that individual. I came from all of these areas that we spoke about, but not one person at Crystal Palace ever pulled me aside and been, oh, Moses, how did you get into training? How's your journey? What hours does your mum work? Is your dad at home? So if you can't build those profiles, how can you just expect a young kid to go run out on the pitch? Yeah. Because that's not the problem. The talent's one thing. We all watch football, it's all great, but what happens when things go wrong? Do you think these players just stop playing football all of a sudden? Do you think these Premier League players just turn up one day and forget how to kick a ball? So if you're not focusing on the mentality and the journey of where they're coming from, why is this not tracked? Why are we not using the same type of algorithms as TikTok, Instagram, and all of these other social media platforms? Because I believe we can really influence the way behavior is and cultural environment is. If you look at the landscape of sport, there's a colloquial language spoken in Australia, the US, and the UK. It's all different. If you're from the streets from London, it's different from the streets in Australia and America. So if someone who's been a lawyer and they've gone to private school in Switzerland turns around and tells you, oh, that's how we have to educate players, yeah, maybe, but you may need to educate executives from your background. Yeah. But there isn't no one better than to help these players understand that, you see, gambling, right? There's two sides. There's illegal, there's illegal. Just like any other addiction, whether it's alcohol or smoking, you can have the same element in gambling. Gambling isn't necessarily bad if it's regulated. It's when you guys don't understand the traps of what can come if you go and put on a bet. That's how it starts.
At this point, you're knee deep in match fixing stuff. Still playing at Whitehawk at the time.
No, I was at Bromley.
At Bromley at the time.
Yeah.
What was it like leading up to your arrest? You've touched on your time in prison, but those like weeks, days, moments before, were you aware something was on the horizon, or did it kind of just take you out of the blue?
Yeah, it was quite a difficult period because how do I describe? There's only so much you can wing. So you have to remember, four of my teammates know what's going on. We got to a stage where there was games that I wasn't even part of fixing, right? So I quickly realized, probably halfway through the season, that I'm going on the pitch and I'm like, we're winning, but I know this game's fixed, but I don't have a direct involvement with. So those games where someone's gone 1v1, crossed the ball in and scored a worldie, I'm like, nah, man, this isn't really right. Then obviously I start to hear things on the pitch. So then as these guys expand what they're doing, it quickly came close to me. I'm like, my feelings and emotional state really started to kick in. So we had a guy who I call Braveheart in our team, and he was vice captain at the time. So probably towards the end, it was really the Maidenhead game that we played. They always wanted the goalkeeper who's like the golden nugget in any type of match fixing in football, from my knowledge back then. But whilst we went into that Maidenhead games, I heard a fan, or like I can hear like people talking, but whereas you try to block things out on a football pitch, it got to a stage where Braveheart's got sent off and he's actually called out. Like, guys, I know what you're doing. And I remember looking at him and like, again, he's a purist, so he's from the same area as me, and like every day I spent with him, I could never really look him in the eyes because he's so honest and pure. And I feel that game was a turning point in the end of my career at Bromley, because he found out after he called me when I was driving to Milton Keynes what was going on, because I told him. But then there was a last game that I had for Bromley, and my teammates knew. My manager still played me even though that game wasn't fixed. I ended up getting man of the match, but it wasn't until I was driving back from Bromley I came past Holloway Road and I just broke down, man. I don't know what came over me, but I just started crying on the way back. And I'm like, this isn't like, I'm not really an emotional person like that. And I'm like, why do I feel like I'm overwhelmed? And all I can think of is my teammates and everything up until that point. I'm like, nah, man, how do you stop this? And I got to a time where, even after the first game, it wasn't even about the money, you know. I think I was probably in a deep depressive state where I'd become numb, and the money just made me feel more greed, more power, and more importantly, like, let me hit a number. That's all I kept saying. Let me hit a number. I'll hit that number. Let me hit another number. And that was really the challenging part. So I remember going home to see my partner in Streatham, breaking down in my car, driving, parked up. Then I left Bromley. No one knew, but I left and I was like, I'm never playing football again. So just to give you an idea, I still had the network of not only match fixers, I had the back of my brain on the left side saying, go and start your own thing and build it yourself. I had a network of match fixers where I could have built it myself. Then towards the end, the boss didn't really care about me no more. But one thing he said was like, look, anytime you need to go and get your money, this is where it is. At that time, I couldn't move that amount of money because if I got arrested with that, I was a goner. But then I was like, what am I going to do next? And I had a young player who I knew, Michael Boateng at Palace, that played in the same league. He didn't know the level of what I was doing. No one did. But I was like, let me help Michael because he passed the finance on my car. So Michael passes the finance. I ask him what he wants. He says Air Force Ones. And I'm like, bro, you just give me a 40 grand car in credit. What do you want? No, bro, get me a pair of Air Forces. Go JD, buy him Air Forces. I'm like, you sure? He's like, yeah. So after I've given him the Air Force Ones, I think he had a smart card that he needed to pay off. So I remember going to Mayfair, going to link the match fixers, got 5 grand, gave him some money to pay off his car, but that was the wrong thing to do at the time, thinking about it now. But then what that done was almost allow Michael to slowly open his eyes and be like, "Right, where did you get that money from? Bring me in." So I was like, let me bring Michael in because he can take over what I was doing, but let me kind of train him or help him understand how this works, right? So Chinese syndicate to the side. I meet these Singaporean match fixers through a teammate called Delroy Facey. So I'm not playing football no more. Michael went and joined Sutton, I think. I've gone to Sutton. I'm like, let me try and fall in love with football again. Went to the pitch. I couldn't play no more, man. Like at that time, I think I was on like £250 a week or £100, if that. Couldn't find it. Then Michael was like, oh, Mo, come Whitehawk. I was like, bro, I don't want to come Brighton and train and travel. And he was like, no, come Whitehawk. Like, I was like, bro, I don't know, man. He's like, come. I ended up joining now. But then match fixing always loomed. So I was like, Mike, I don't know no one in this team, you do, right? I'll tell you how to do things. And one thing with match fixers, A, they always guarantee you pocket money or like coming to the meeting. And B, I got to a stage where I knew so much, there were certain games that happened that we didn't even fix games. The scores just came in, right? So not every game that was fixed actually went through. So in the course of that season, out of the 40 games, there was probably like 8 or 9 games that were actually successful. A lot of other teams who were fixing had got things wrong. So when I speak about my experience, out of the games that I was involved in, not every match was fixed because I'd given them different players that wanted to fix and I'll make money on returns in other ways as well. So I ended up leaving Whitehawk at half time, walked off the pitch. I was like, I'll never play football again. Then I had a 2-week window of just not doing anything. Then that's when I introduced Michael to Delray. After the introduction, Michael took it upon himself to go to a meeting. I didn't know about that meeting. Michael had gone and met the National Crime Agency. I remember ringing Michael and I was like, oh, this is what's going to happen with these new match fixers. There was 25 grand on the table. And I was like, yeah, who did you go link? And I remember him like, umming and ahhing, and I was like, why do I feel like this? Like, bro, who did you go link? He was like, oh, no, like, I'm like, huh? So I remember having that feeling and I was like, there's something going on that I don't know about. And I actually wasn't going to go meet these people. So Michael's gone to meet the police. He doesn't know the police. The police give him pocket money. The Daily Telegraph are investigating this new match fixing syndicate. I'm thinking Michael's acting weird now. I'm calling him, trying to organise stuff. He's giving me one-word answers. I was on a driving ban at that time. And I remember being in Streatham. They're coming down to AFC Wimbledon versus Dagenham and Redbridge. And I remember saying, look, this game's fixed. How much money you got? They sent me the money. It was the Daily Telegraph's money. I was like, okay, 1-0, score's gonna be in. Have you got the money? There's 5 grand pocket money. There's a 20 grand difference if the game's fixed in the first half. I was like, oh, Mike, I'm gonna go to the game. So my friends picked me up from Streatham. Ben, who I played with at Crystal Palace, didn't know anything about the fix. But I wanted to intercept this syndicate because of what Michael was doing, and I didn't know at the time. They followed the match fixers from Manchester all the way to Kingston. They've given me the money in the alleyway. I've had a meeting with the new match fixers. Then I remember he said something to me that threw me off in a meeting. blonde woman's walked in, white guys walked in. They're sitting down in the middle of Kingston in an Indian takeaway. And I was like, this is odd. As I've left, we got halfway up to Kingston's or Kings Meadows ground. Before I know it, like probably around 8 or 9 officers at the time just surrounded us. So they were like, yeah, you're being arrested for conspiracy to defraud the betting trade. And that's when I knew everything had gone down. At that time, the irony of the story was the day before I was actually going to go pick up the money. So had I gone to where the money was and picked that money up, they would have probably gone to my house at that time and found everything.
Wow. You're probably thinking in your head, this is bang to rights.
You know what, when I was arrested, the first thing I thought, obviously, the money. The other side of it was when they said conspiracy to defraud the betting trade, the last thing on my mind was Michael. So it wasn't until I was like, oh, where are we going? They said Birmingham. I was like, we're in London. So they drove us to Cannock, which is like 3.5 hours. And I was like, why are we getting driven to Birmingham? So when I was getting booked in, I probably stayed in custody for 20 hours. Luckily for me, because they couldn't give me back my bag, I knew my bank details off the top of my head, so I ordered a cab. But then, as I've ordered a cab, I saw Michael come through. Well, no, Michael's best friend at the time come through the station. I was like, huh? Like, why is he here? So, cab took forever. Got back to Streatham. I remember falling asleep and waking up, and something just told me to turn on Sky News. And I remember Sky News, the bar was like 7 footballers arrested under the biggest match fixing scandal. That's when I knew, yep. Have they gone to where the money, to be honest, that was the only thing that was on my mind. Have they gone to where the money is?
Mad. Did you feel a sense of responsibility for the other guys that was caught up in it?
Yeah, 100%. So I was the only player to have 2 criminal trials. Even now, there isn't a match fixing law. The first trial was difficult because Michael never fixed the game. He wasn't a match fixer. And unfortunately for him, that meeting put him in prison. But then, had Michael not met Delray, who I linked them to, which was the conspiracy, they would have never known each other. So I think probably for me, the hardest part was knowing that Michael went to prison on something he didn't do. Also, his friend Hakeem, who just turned up to the meeting with Michael, didn't know anything about match fixing, had to go through 6 weeks of going to court every day and his reputation being damaged. So I remember giving evidence, and I think at the time the prosecutor was asking me questions around everyone, and I was like, I can tell you what I've done. However, they didn't find a match that was actually fixed. And the law wasn't, you're going to jail for match fixing. First it was defrauding the betting trade, then it was bribery, then it was conspiracy. So as the indictment continued to change, I was like, why are we not going to prison? Or like, why is there no like thing that says, hey, you've done this, you go in jail? So I realized even then, there was a real big grey area and a flaw in the law. I was thinking, hold on a minute. The people who actually done the thing never got caught. At that time, they had elevated by trying to buy football clubs in the UK and using betting sponsorship. And I'm like, okay, I understand how it works, but then going into my trial with Delray, they linked what happened in Lincoln and me handing over Michael's phone number in the conspiracy. So when I've gone to prison, we actually went to prison in Birmingham. So even though I was in jail for 4 months, I've never been in jail before, but Birmingham was probably like a massive eye-opener for me. Spending 2 months there made me realize, like, let me like reflect and think about what's happened. And probably another hard point was Delray is 10 years older than me, right? So me and Delray played in the FA Cup and he was my captain. So we're in like a 2x4 cell, or however small it was at that time. 2 grown men on a bunk bed with no covers. He's ripped a cover, put it over him, and I'm like, he's still in his suit from court. I'm like, bro, man was actually like a professional footballer. So look at where we are now. I remember that first night, me and him never slept, and I saw another side of Delroy that I've never seen. So when I talk about gambling and addiction, I'm like, okay, now it makes sense. So when he introduced me to the match fixers, he was having separate problems in his own life that he probably couldn't go to anyone or the club. So a lot of his behavior by going to teammates or younger players and what he was going from, like, raw, you know what, that's actually deep, you know. It's very much similar to Jamie, where Jamie has the firearm. I go and tell Chris fobs me off, but look at the path Jamie took. Delroy, and this ain't me giving excuses or speaking for him, but what did he go through up until the point he approached me and my teammates and said, I want a match fix? So I realized not only was I at worst case scenario, Delroy was already there. And slowly, like, another side of like the accountability in prison is I can hold what I've done, and even though most won't agree with it, there's a time in my life before football that spiraled into the decisions I made. And I think the hardest part for me was knowing that an innocent person in Michael and his friend and what Michael's gone through, you can't take that back. So when I sat down in prison, I was like, how do I make this better? You know, even though I know I've been some form of sacrifice, this is way bigger than me. You know, this ain't about little Moses from Croydon or Southeast London. We're talking about trillions. So if I don't look and expand my mind, I need to take my own self out of my body and, like, this ain't the time to be emotional or like lick your wounds here. It's a time for you to think and really understand, okay, well, how do you stop the next version of me existing in what I was doing? Because ultimately this is real, man. And the more real it is, it wasn't until I got out of prison, I realized that there was live betting markets on academy football. So when I sat down with the FA for those 6 months and they turned around and told me now betting's gone to a place where, you know, academy players are going to be targeted. Then they built education and integrity. And again, as I started to go in and out these clubs, I'm like, bro, you man are like pro players. But they never had a match fixing problem. Gambling and betting now, listen, how long's a piece of string? You know, you had players betting on their own games on the bench. So I'm like, imagine my mind went different because I feel being arrested saved my life. I was at a stage before I was arrested where I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but had it not been for my daughter, I'd have been in Singapore. I had a one-way ticket to Singapore to go and expand this into Europe and the rest of the world. Then obviously I won't be sitting here today, or I may be lucky to be alive because of what I was involved in. So when you look at fear, those risks we take from our community young and being young and flamboyant and lifestyle and everything else, I don't want to sound like an old head here, but I never want to be someone that has to preach to you and be like, don't do this and don't do that. What I want to do is say, listen, put the money aside, right? You can have $1 million today, you can have nothing tomorrow. But you know your peace of mind and waking up in the morning, no, you don't owe no one any money, you ain't done nothing bad. You working hard is what got me into Palace. So the benefit I had to remind myself in jail, like, bro, you know what, you've done a lot of things, man. Don't forget that. So if you are going to be judged and you are going to be in the position you are, here's an open book. And part of my journey is, I could have done this a long time ago, by the way. I could have came out of prison, wrote a book, told a story, and I'm like, it would have been for all the wrong reasons. I don't actually need the money. I signed at Whitehawk on £200 trying to negotiate with a manager, and I'm like, you're dealing with someone that's got what he had at that time, so it's not about the money. Or a lot of these players or people in general may think, right, you know, I'm gonna make money. And I'm like, okay, cool. There's the amount, what are you gonna do with it? Because if you haven't been taught and educated into that, I'm coming from a community where I didn't go private school. You know, my parents didn't send me boarding school. We didn't have this foundation of understanding. These schools don't actually teach us what we should know. We're conforming to a language, a barrier, a culture of understanding where, yeah, it's good to work hard, but I've worked hard, now there's a brick wall. Why can't I get a job? Okay, footballers, you are meant to go and run out on that pitch. Yes, entertainment, but you're human. You know, the same pressures they go through, we all go through. Life's tough. Everything's hard. But then you can mask social media and all of these things, and like, No one really snaps where they live, you know. No one isn't in the street saying, hey, by the way, I've had a bad day. Do you know what I mean? So because of my own experiences and development, and probably me coming from a generation without no social media, it's so essential that these players and athletes realize, whether you're at grassroots or whether you're at the top, trust me, man, there's much more to life, because there's another world in sport that does exist. And I experience that every single day over the last 10 years because of the work I do.
100%. I think it's quite inspiring, man. Like, prison would be, and I'm sure it was, such a low point for a lot of people that would probably break them, do you know what I mean? Or you'd come out angry or whatever, but you use that as like a period of reflection. How do I make this better? Calmer, do you know what I mean? And I think it's a nice bookend with the start of your playing career with your release from Palace. You kind of treated both of those like low points as legs up to how do I improve? Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, but you know what it is, bro? It's like, I cry, I bleed, you know. We all have the same things, but especially for men or young boys, it's like, it's hard to express yourself, man. The reason why some of these players are amazing talents is because they have what everybody should have. Sport or football should give you access for hope and being the best version of yourself, whether you make it, whether you don't make it. So for me, it's like, I'm a big believer in, even at your lowest point, it doesn't need to be match fixing. Everyone has low points, but where do you find the core to pick yourself back up? It takes a village. I haven't got to where I am on my own, by the way. So what you see is Moses, but what's behind me is some incredible people that have taken me to this point from a kid up until now. Whether that's in business or whether that's in grassroots or whether that's in football, my relationships have been built from me trying to educate everybody where I'm coming from. So I don't really have any fear or like any type of embarrassment in some of the things I say, because that's like, if you want the truth, it's there. There ain't nothing I've done that you can't turn around and tell me I've done. I'm telling you what I've done. If you don't believe it, no problem. You know what? It's for you to have an understanding of what you'll face if you don't understand this as a parent, as a guardian, as someone who works in a club. So when we take accountability for our actions, we need to create the framework, the ethics, the regulation, because it's us. We are the culture, if that makes sense. Without no footballers, there is no football. So if you're not protecting these footballers, okay, the money side of it is good, but then again, the more money you make, the more you can smoke and hide. That's me being real. You know, you get to a point in life where it's like, okay, yeah, you can have £1 million today, but what happens when you want 2 million? Then you start chasing your tail, then before you know it, there's one thing, we're gonna mess up with human beings, right? But then again, what type of mistakes are you willing to take? Because the higher risk, the higher reward. So if you're gambling, there's a version of you that it's bubbling. It's like scoring a goal or making a last-ditch tackle. But when you lose it and you stop caring. And you have to remember another thing, perspectives is, I've seen the worst of like the streets in respect. Like, I've never been someone that's gone out and done bad things, but I know a lot of people because of where I'm coming from. So I've made it a choice to avoid what I've avoided young. The last place I thought I was going to end up is in prison. I went to jail where people are asking me, why am I here? Yeah. That's the reality of jail. These are people who are doing 25 like life sentences saying to me, "Raw, we went primary school, bro. Why are you here?" I'm thinking, what? Like, why are you here? Then they tell me what they've done, and I'm like, what conversation am I having? Why am I actually here? When you go out on a wing on a dispersal and it's like, jail's a university like Cambridge. You know, if you're a criminal, going to jail allows you to have a bigger expansion into the world because you're in London, you're in the UK, everyone's connected. So these levels of crimes can always expand and grow into other things, because I'll turn around and I'll say to people, okay, well, yes, I did what I did, but then I had a choice. When I came out of prison, do I continue or do I stop? Do I think about the core and build, or do I have all of this knowledge and do things for the wrong reasons? Because if it was money, 100%, I was at a stage where I didn't need the money. I came out of jail, I didn't need the money. I need to cleanse myself of everything that got me here, where I'm like, you know what? I still want to be that person walking down the road and no one knows who I am. I still want to be that person speaking to the youth or going out to my community and understand what's really going on inside, because you can always tell Going to jail just made me realize how lost certain people are. I can look at you in your eyes and I'm like, right, you've had a hard life. And when there's no life behind these eyes, what do you think? How do you think society is going to be? And I'm saying that because I've been fortunate enough to see things from the work I do, going to the European Council, going to FIFA, speaking to politicians, speaking to ex-Scotland Yard detectives who are now in the private sector. And when I speak to these people or go on these panels, I'm like, right, you know what? It's taken me 36 years to realize, you know, we're all human. People doing their jobs. Don't take anything that happens personally, because if you tap into who you're going to become, you are where you are because of where you are, if that makes sense. And just because you're here at the bottom, don't mean you can't rise, because always understand the underdog is the person that allows sport to continue to blossom and be who he is. Everyone loves a story of success, but everyone wants to capitalize on failure. So if we're going to speak about failure, there isn't nothing more deeper than what I've done, because no one actually sees the other side of sport.
From your point of view, like, what could governing bodies like FIFA, like the FA, like whoever, what can they do to help protect players from this kind of story?
Yeah, that's a great question. The other side of everything I'm doing, over the last 10 years, I've been building a business. So again, what looks like me is 10 to 15 people behind the scenes that are working towards the business being in the position it's in today. So when I go and speak at UEFA or FIFA, we've gone way beyond talking to players. The players, unfortunately, at the bottom end of the conversation because they just play the game. You need to reach the levels of coaches, guardians, referees, executives, senior management. And as you get to the top, you have the FIFA president, the UEFA president, the IOC president, and more importantly, there's a language like a yo-yo that needs to be spoken up until every level. So whilst I've had the vision of creating quite a sustainable use case as to what I believe the solutions are, I've been very fortunate behind the scenes to continue to work with some of the best people possible that I've found in the last 15 years that have allowed Game Changer to be at the forefront of where we believe education mixed with different variations of new technologies can really help and assist. And again, to your point, it's way beyond anything I can do because it isn't just for me. It's about creating something that's everlasting for people to understand what integrity is, what match manipulation may be, what safeguarding protocols you need to take, and speak in a colloquial language into these organizations for them to realize football and sport is a culture globally. And within that culture, I have a first class view and lens into what that looks like. So for Game Changer 360, we've been able to look at the sporting space and really build a business into where we believe regulation, compliance, and governance should be held at its highest standards. And I feel where I find myself in now, because this isn't public's knowledge, it's making sure these interviews and everything else, it's not necessarily about educating players, it's educating people. Because when you have these challenges, or when the Premier League has a case like Paqueta, they need somewhere to go because it's all collaborative. We should be able to work with the betting industry. We should be able to work with law enforcement. One thing I've managed to do is sit very tight and understand, okay, America now has deregulated betting. 2.5 years ago, I was already in direct contact with the Division of Gaming in New Jersey. You know, we've already spoken to a lot of higher profile sports within America because they're very much at the forefront of where I was in 2011. So the benefit I have from an international level, I've managed to establish significant business opportunities globally to some of the most prominent people at the highest level in sport in order for us to go and deliver what the company's aims and institutions are going to be when they start embodying the work that we're doing.
What's your relationship like with football now, on a personal level? Like,
Yeah.
I understand the work you're doing with players, communities, organisations, but like just on a personal level, do you still watch football? Do you ever get to have a kickabout?
Yeah.
Does that love come back, or is it kind of like...
Yeah, I love football, man. I love it even more so because the benefit and the love and joy I see, it's actually for young people, you know. I feel from my experiences and the lights of what I've dealt with, young players have the opportunity to go from here to here. Whereas before you may have a manager, a coach, and like football is very much a small industry. These young players, not only coming from my community, but all over the world, they're all outliers. And there isn't anything more joyful than seeing them go out on the pitch and express themselves, but have the support that's needed. And I feel if you look at players now, their foundations, family, and environment are the reasons why you have a Jude, why you have a Skelly, why you have a Lamar. And these are some of the best players, potential Ballon d'Or winners, that are really fighting the fight for idols, doing the right things as well. So imagine watching football now, even though people may say the 90s, the 2000s, the Ronaldinhos were the best generation. This is the best generation for hope and opportunity. That's, for me personally, what the game's built on. And for a lot of these young players who are going to earn money and have success, it's even more important that I believe they're even better protected. We live in a really unique place where the Premier League is the best league in the world, but then again, they'll build you up all the way here. You get to England, you miss a penalty, you go out, you want to enjoy yourself, you want to live a private life, and if your face does not fit the bill, they'll put you down right here, back to the bottom. And I think slowly but surely that's changing, because we're in such a small place in the UK compared to America. My experiences with Americans and American sports is different. They're open, they can express themselves. Whether you're playing in the NFL, the MLB, soccer, or basketball, why are our athletes not put at a pedestal? Because they're the next versions and generations of the future. It's not only footballers as well. You get to hear footballers actually speak now. You get to hear them talk, where, in my opinion, a lot of the older players, they have their version of football, which is great, and have gone and done amazing things, and hats off, all due respect to them. But let the youngsters come through. Let them rewrite their own history. Let them go out and express themselves and play they want to play, because ultimately, if you don't like it, it isn't your generation. We should all support and be able to do more things, not only like this as well, because you need both the good and the bad. You need the success and the failure, but ultimately, we need more David Beckhams. We need more Thierry Henrys. And for me, this England team and England as a whole have got to a stage globally where a lot of these youngsters are playing football for all of the right reasons. Look at Cole Palmer. Cole Palmer goes and wins the World Club Championships. He's gone back to his country of origin. He's given back to the people, So there's so many other Cole Palmers like that. And more importantly, all of these youngsters for the next generation get to experience what they're seeing. You now have one-to-one coaches. You now have agents that have come from the community and built global businesses. You now have so many different elements of football players in a foundation. And more importantly, just like Miles Skelly's mum with Number One Fan Club, you actually have a platform where parents, guardians, and people can go to with the right resource and information you would have never got at football clubs. So it's much more open now. And again, the top clubs do it, but it needs to go into League One. It needs to go into League Two. It needs to go into grassroots, because the money's there, but we can't have a grassroots and a lower level football system where players are barely paid, where players are being released, and it's like, okay, well, where did Moses Swaibu go? When he at Palace 10 years ago? Oh, where is he? Oh, he's in jail now. Where has that been lost, where football actually has a network, just like America, to have an alumni? Just because you ain't paid at that club doesn't mean you're not part of that system. We want you and you and you to still feel part of the club, because you have football in the community, but how do we improve those standards? And more importantly, whilst football does have the resource, it's about having the right information to go and build it up as well, man. So for me, I love the game.
Absolutely. All right, my final question then. If you could send a message to 16-year-old Moses, Palace Academy, 16, 17, what would you say? Is there any warning you'd give, anything you'd say, avoid this? It might sound like a moot point, but you've got to this point now in a really positive place. What would you say to your younger self?
Bravery, speaking up. Be brave. Being a leader is one thing, but bravery really comes from you being open and making the right decisions. I think a 16-year-old Moses was smart enough to know you've got yourself to here because of all of this, whether it's the trauma, the streets, or whatever it is, but you was a role model and an idol, but you weren't brave. Bravery was me opening my mouth and telling people, look, I'm going through some shit. This is what I'm going through. As much as it may seem like a young age, but you go into an academy or a system that allows you to grow and flourish and become a young man or a young woman now. And that bravery for me is making sure you understand, at least you've turned around and you've been brave and you said it. Whatever happens next, can you look into your soul and be like, have you really given 100%, you know? That's what I tell my 16-year-old self.
100%. I think that's a message, you know, by proxy for any young football player out there can take that on board and hopefully heed that advice. But yeah, Moses, man, thank you so much for sitting
Yeah,
down
no,
with
it's a
us.
pleasure, man, honestly. Thank you guys for reaching out, man, honestly.